Bueno, buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for coming. The presentation will deal with cyberspace and terrorism, and first of all, I'd like to warn you that since the conference is focused on families and students and people who may not be experts in this world, I've made a presentation easy for everyone to understand. So it's not as technical, but rather social, so people can understand which is the main problem of terrorism within cyberspace. So there is a short index here. We'll give a few warnings and introduction, but first of all, just a few warnings. Essential due to the geopolitical international situation we're experiencing. So it's essential not to identify Muslims with terrorists, just like the Christians are not all extreme right or have questionable practices. We need to take this into account, otherwise we can find several designs on social networks that show that right-wing Christians only represent themselves, while Osama bin Laden represents all fanatical Muslim terrorists. And this is a bad understanding of the terrorism phenomenon. The second warning is the power of words. As you may know, in media, they're giving a lot of importance to the idea of calling Daesh to Islamic State. Even though it's a different detail, it's important to call a spade a spade. If we call them Islamic State, we're giving them a small victory, and we need to take that into account. Thirdly, we have an image of Bataclan, or the unfortunate murders of a few days ago in Paris, and when these things are dealt with in the private, public and political spheres, it looks like this threat is very far away from our lives. And when these things happen, unfortunately, we realize that we're all potential objectives of terrorism and cyber-terrorism. So from here, we would like to make everyone pay attention to this, reflect on this, because unfortunately it's a very real threat regarding the introduction, cyberspace and cyber-terrorism. Some people ask us, who will deal with our security in the future? Our colleagues from the economists have a very interesting critical imagination and they were asking, well, what would be the war regarding the future look like? And there's this big strong, but there's a little guy here saying, yo dude, I'm back here. I'm the one dealing with security, but the paradigm has totally changed. Now these are people that from a sofa may protect us or attack us. And we went from something material to something virtual, and it's essential we understand this. It's a massive paradigm change in our society. It's not like lead or silver, or the amount of assets, tanks or bullets you have, but rather the digital and virtual capability you have to attack or get protected. So the main aim of our speech is to understand why terrorism has provoked or entailed a transition to the network, to internet and the cyberspace. So we have three main objectives. First, to start with the basis. Why don't we have a terrorism definition and therefore a definition of cyber-terrorism? And why that creates serious problems. Secondly, we'll try to explain why terrorists identify cyberspace as very important platforms for their propaganda and recruiting tasks. And thirdly, try to build some alternatives and solutions that allow us to shortcut the problem. Objective number one, from the basis. Why is there a lack of definition of the cyber-terrorism and terrorism? First of all, it's a security threat, no doubt. It unfortunately has a certain rationale, and there are many experts in this topic that are trying to pay attention to this, not just for Illuminati that think of attacking us, setting up 4 bombs, or going into Bataclan. They have a calculation system that is right for them. That doesn't mean that we're legitimating it or justifying it. However, to understand the threat, attack it, neutralize it and combat it, we need to know where it's coming from a rational calculation. However, nowadays we still don't have terrorism or cyber terrorism that is globally accepted and that has reached a consensus. Unfortunately, due to lack of political will. And in the international society, there are many different interests. As we can see in our national newspapers, we have Putin, Obama, Hollande, concerned about whether he designs a national coalition to combat this phenomenon. And this confrontation of interests leads to everyone to define terrorism in a different way based on their position, and since there is no consensus we cannot combat something on which we don't agree. Secondly, why is cyberspace the new field of action of terrorism? First of all, we may imagine that we have a colleague with lumberjack t-shirt, our neighbor, and a good-looking girl that need to carry out some tasks such as doing the shopping, doing a tax return form. I'm still romantic, I still go shopping even though these things take time. However, if I'm offered to do it through a tablet or the internet, is much more comfortable. So there's a trend for easy access. It's much cheaper, much more operational to do everything through the mobile or the computer. And as we all know, there's a trend to take everything to cyberspace through the internet. And there is a problem there, because we're not the only ones who transfer our tasks to the internet. But we have also created a massive amount or massive increase of our independence to the virtual media. All the critical infrastructures such as the underground, the water, electricity, energy generation, all that depends on internet security. However, that is not guaranteed, because we have some unfortunate neighbors or unpleasant neighbors who are still using the network in the same way. And we can see the cyber caliphate, and these Daesh people are using the internet as a medium of propaganda. We're seeing how the time of recruitment is being reduced from years to months, and from months to weeks. Also in our country, we're seeing that how some people are becoming more radical and are going to Syria, Iraq, to combat in just less than 1 or 2 weeks. That is crazy, and we changes completely the way of understanding the phenomenon and how we need to combat it. Secondly, through the internet and through that propaganda, they're carrying out a message that is totally adaptable to all audiences. It's crazy. Then they translate it to the different languages they're interested in. They adapt it to the needs they consider they may find or that may be remarkable. This is why they have Canadian, Latin American, French, Spanish, and even Chinese fighters. Their message is so adaptable, and the bait is so big that many people fall into this. And as Fernando Sauter was saying a few days in Zaragoza, this message fills many people. From a philosophical point of view, there's some certainty markers such as work and the family in the past that are now being solved. And some people, as we can see in Paris and even in Spain, are lacking a certain integration. We should do some criticism from our side and from theirs. The fact is they're on the side for different reasons, a lack of socio-economic interaction or social interaction or religious interaction. But in fact, these terrorism messages, this radicalization is getting spread and is becoming more remarkable for many people. And this is happening on many platforms. Facebook, Telegram, as we saw on the main media a few days ago, or even the main TV stations. Let's remember the cyber attack led by Daesh versus TV5 Monde, the French TV station. And this shows that the threat is completely real. Although we need to remember that this was not a one-off cyber attack. A few days before, there was a post-it in one of the monitors of the news where there was the password of the Twitter for the TV station. So they found the password and they could log in. So to sum up this first question, why cyberspace? Why do they choose it? Immediacy, global accessibility, anonymity, and asymmetry. So all those terrorists or people from organized organized crime, who has done a rational calculation of their options, will choose to use the internet. Secondly, our dependents have grown so much that our vulnerabilities have shot up. And this is very suggestive for everyone who wants to attack us. And thirdly, any phenomenon, any device, tablet or computer, as many colleagues may have mentioned earlier, are unprotected. So the possibility of attacking us through the network is extremely easy. And until that is not sorted, and until we have a proactive attitude, and we protect our security at home, on our mobiles and tablets, we'll be under a serious threat. The third objective is finding efficient and effective replies and answers to this phenomenon. How can we combat it? Well, first of all, we have a problem because there is no single way or single formula, there's no magic formula to combat it and to apply to get rid of this problem right now. And we cannot even start a war against it, even though some well-known people keep insisting on trying to combat this through military media or military ways. Other people have tried that before, but this was not the solution, as it has been proven. So if there is no single way, if this is not a war, how can we do it? And why cannot we do it just with army ways? First of all, because it is an ethereal threat with a reticular structure. There is no professional army and no limited territory. And fifth, their nature is halfway between what is real and what is virtual. So it's very difficult to combat something when we don't really know where to attack it. Right now, as you may know, we're hearing whether to bomb Iraq or Fallujah, or to limit internet freedom or verify other things. Well, this may work, but the degree of effectiveness and efficiency is quite reduced, mainly because we don't really know where we're going to put our attention. So what can we do? We cannot just not do anything. We can combat it, prevent it, and neutralize it. But how? First of all, as we mentioned at the beginning, we need to do a diagnosis. People may say, well, to combat it and to have internet security, we need common sense. And for common sense, we need a common knowledge. If everyone who is here today had been informed on cybersecurity, we couldn't be able to protect ourselves. Secondly, there's a lack of governance. Who's governing the internet? Who guarantees security? Whom should we ask for answers from? Is there an accountability on the internet? Right now there isn't, which creates quite a few problems, as we'll see later. Secondly, thirdly, there is a lack of prevention. There are only reactive attitudes. All of a sudden, France is approving a law where all communications through the internet and all the emails will be intercepted. Can you imagine that at some point we got told, well, all your letters will be opened before they get to the recipient? The reaction of society would be a shock. Why are you opening my letters or my packages? That's sort of private, but if it happens on the internet, we don't care. There's no reaction there, there's no legal action or demand. And the replies, the answer cannot be reactive, and reducing people's right to internet freedom. Fourth, there is an absence of public and private collaboration. There's no teamwork by institutions and private bodies to tackle or attack this problem. Next, there are some wrong stories. There's some sort of Islamophobia, and segmented messages are not favoring at all the solutions we may implement in the future. Next, we need to understand that this is a global threat, and a real threat. We have this kind of conferences, such as Cybercamp 2015 in Washington. There are also a few initiatives. We need to make sure that for most people, for all of us that may have a little bit of knowledge, a little bit more knowledge than our neighbors, we need to understand that this is a real and very present threat. And last, the diagnosis leads to the idea that the answers need to be multidisciplinary and multidimensional. It's not just about reducing internet freedom or getting out on the field or bomb certain cities. It's cooperation for development, diplomatic cooperation, trying to pause the confrontations between the different ethnicities and to increase citizenship security. Very wide measures. So with this diagnosis, we can get to this to the next pendulum, which is a very simple chart. What we are mentioning here doesn't just mean that people get terrorized due to the risks that may exist on the internet. This is not about blocking people with fear. This may happen, or they can take your Facebook details, your bank details, they can blackmail you and terrorize you. But terror is not the aim or the extreme that we have now, which is society lacking the basic knowledge on internet and cyber security. People and the population needs to be trained and informed. So these are the proposals. First of all, believing in a multicultural dialogue. It may seem naive, but it's essential. If we get the right political will, we can define terrorism. And we know really well and clearly what we need to combat and neutralize, we'll be able to do it, probably. The second proposal is to criticize the short-term trends of the international society. The military instruments are totally necessary as a contention short-term instrument. But we need to implement long-term instruments and measures for future generations to avoid radicalization and to prevent people from having an incentive to get into the field of terrorists. We need to give them life expectations and options to avoid them from, or to prevent them from getting radicalized. Just like my security depends on my colleagues and fellow national security, my state's society depends on our neighbors. My state security depends on my neighbor's security, and we need to take that into account. And we need to deal with the deep causes of terrorism. Fourth, international law is essential. We may feel a bit lazy when it comes to working on this, however, that's the essential element that differentiates us from the people who try to harm us. At the same time, the network is essential for us. And currently, all critical infrastructures and even our common life, our life in common, our personal life, goes through the internet. Knowing that those two elements, international law and the network, are essential for us, we need to update international law urgently for the new challenges on the internet. Fifth, as I was saying earlier at the beginning, that idea of the messages and following certain advertising or certain biased news messages, we need to eliminate concepts such as the war against terrorism or Islamic terrorism, because they limit our success probabilities, and we need to understand that not everyone may understand how cybersecurity works. We need to explain it, and it will work, I'm sure. And we need to be responsible with language and the information we give. Sixth, media, mass media. Is there freedom of expression? Of course, but also with responsibility, trying to get an informed and trained society. Otherwise, we'll get this scheme, which is the over-information that leads to a lack of information at a time of biased perspectives, and that leads to a radicalization. From mass media, from internet, and from paper media, we need to work on this. To sum up these proposals, our six-pack talks about a multicultural dialogue and a specific intervention, developing international law, international cooperation, cyberspace, police collaboration at public and private levels, and a military intervention as a contention resource. But mostly we need to deal with intelligence and cyberspace. We need to give this a lot more importance. And if you're here, you probably know about this. Until recently, Spain didn't have a cybersecurity strategy. Internet was part of the work of 4 people who thought we were weird. And eventually we have proven that cybersecurity and the lack of it affects everyone. on the net. So we need to demand and get involved in these topics. Therefore, before I finish, so that we can create a little debate, which be very interesting to change our opinions on this, we need to reflect a little bit, and I invite you to think on the degree of importance and the degree of influence we may have in this topic. And I'd like to invite you to question your comfort bubbles and the comfort zones that we are living, because we have a big influence on the international scenario, in the national and even local and private scenarios. If we take cybersecurity seriously with 3 or 4 measures that our colleagues mentioned earlier in other workshops and even in the main auditorium, it's very easy to get protected at the private and public levels. That means getting out of our comfort zone and questioning our world. If we want to do war on the seeds of terrorism, we need to start with ourselves, be more responsible with our own security. In that way, it is very likely that we all together will be able to create an effective response against terrorism and its increasing role on the internet. So, which could be the conclusions that I'd like to leave open for you, so that we all get our conclusions. Jihadism 2.0 is real, and citizenship collaboration is needed, as well as a cybersecurity culture by citizens to work on this. We need to work on a global scale. It's useless that out of 100 people here, only 2 know about cybersecurity and only 3 get involved in this. We need to explain this to people to make it easy and understandable and give them the appropriate instruments and information so that people from home may guarantee their security on the email, their bank accounts, their social networks. It's a citizenship matter, so that we can learn from each other. And of course, we need to have proactive strategies instead of reactive and restrictive strategies. I think that we all may agree, otherwise it will be a pleasure to debate it. But I think it's common sense. What's the point of not doing anything, and then when we're attacked physically, such as in Bataclan or 11M, March 11 in Madrid, or the internet, whenever they hack or destroy the website of the Ministry of Defense or a private company? Do we need to wait for that to happen? Do you think it would be better to have a proactive strategy and to anticipate that? The cost of fixing and making our citizens feel secure after a cyber attack is massive, but preventing it has a lower cost. And besides, the restrictive word, we're seeing how now we're approving certain laws that just favor restriction, and we're limiting our freedom on our network, and we need to combat that. Unfortunately, if we have less freedom on the internet, that will not guarantee that we are more secure until we understand that premise and we demand positively that point. We will be in a problematic situation. I wanted to make this presentation short and agile to generate a debate. I didn't want to get into technical details, otherwise these people, families and young people who may not have a technical knowledge on this, may not understand it. So I hope that we dealt with some important issues. I'm willing to help with anything you may need, and I'm willing to answer anything and any questions you may have. Thank you.
Sí. Bueno, me parece muy bien la charla de conciencia.
I really like the awareness raising speech you gave, and I think that any citizen of the world needs to be aware. What I think is that a terrorism act is a provocation act. Unfortunately, the advantage is that from the hackers community or within the cybersecurity community and professionals is the time to decriminalize the hackers, so that the public bodies such as the ministries, the home offices, INCIBE and others give us the opportunity with that legal frame of doing things that may be illegal. Those great hackers are very necessary for the community, may do their bit in this defense. I don't know whether there are any initiatives that already go along these lines, but I think it's a very good way of cleaning the hacker's image and availing of the talent we have here in Spain. Well, thank you very much for that comment. I totally agree with you, actually, from the beginning to the end, 100%. As you well said, the figure of the hacker has been criminalized from the time hackers came up. It's like the bad guy in the film. Why? Well, I think it's the blame of the press. That word sounds a lot if it's associated to something bad. This is why you talked about media. We need to work with the media. Sometimes the message being given doesn't have a bad intention, but it's not filtered enough. And it may lead just like radicalization, that people who work on the internet are weird people that we don't need to relate to because they're evil. And it's essential to understand that the people who do this work may help, may do their bit to guarantee personal security of the state and international society. That's essential, and we should have more initiatives. For example, an example of that is Chema Alonso. I only have praise words from him. He collaborates with the authorities, but just he and 3 or 4 other people from here and other institutions, which we should invite the national and governmental bodies to open their doors to the people who do this for a living. But I insist, the problem is that they collaborate with this cause for the welfare of citizenship. Independently, if you collaborate, you may need to skip some laws. And some people are scared of this. So there should be an initiative from the Home Office to create a gateway for people to collaborate. It looks like Anonymous are good now because they declare the war to Daesh. In Spain a few years ago, they got a few people that they said were from Anonymous, and from the press they dismantled the whole thing. I'm not going that the Anonymous people are good, the Daesh people are bad, but there are many professionals in cybersecurity that can do their bit. Instead of training policemen, that may take years for them to get to that knowledge and do the work that the professionals we already have can do now. Excuse me, just to comment on that, because you mentioned INCIBE. Well, I work for INCIBE, and there are action lines in collaboration with the state forces. I cannot tell you about them, they're not public. They're not disclosed, but there are action lines, and citizens can collaborate with the state and security forces through their websites. If you have access to the websites, both the National Police and the Civil Guard, you can spread your knowledge, see how you can collaborate, and we're collaborating with people for them to act. And there are agreements, because INCIBE reports to the Department of Energy, Industry and Tourism, and we have agreements with the Home Office to deal with this. There are public and private collaborations and public collaborations, and let's remember that these people are acting and taking measures. I know that, and I'm sure you're doing great, but I have a proposal to add to those initiatives, that INCIBE gets in touch with the SCON organizers and gets in touch with the hackers. Well, INCIBE sponsors some of these CON meetings. Well, but we should fight against the Daesh. But that's not the responsibility of the Cybercamp. It's the responsibility of the security and state forces, and that's what they work. We don't have that responsibility. No, you nor I. We can collaborate if a threat is identified, and they'll act in the best way possible. But it's not our responsibility to do so. Well, it is true, as the colleague was saying, that the fact that we are here now in this conference means that things are getting ahead. And this umbrella is getting spread, it's growing. There is a private character there, it's a pretty sensitive issue, but I think we can keep increasing it and we can keep creating these initiatives just like we create these conferences. And as our colleagues said, we can create a system where we can create networking initiatives that would mark a big difference in these points.
Can you hear me? Yes. Well, I'd just like to congratulate you for your presentation, and I would like to ask, well, just fourth thing, to talk to us about North Korea, and also the communication and how communications are hacked on the high seas, and whether people collaborate, or the people that collaborate with the police, what degree of protection do they receive for subsequent anonymity and things like that. And one last one, let me see. The mentality of the radical individuals is a really tough one. They go after everybody, and the hackers that we have around us, do you really think that they can fight against that kind of life force, this really kind of conviction that they have, and that that doesn't seem to make sense to many of us? Okay, first of all, North Korea. Well, if anybody has information about that, well, I would I would be a great admirer of theirs, because we have hardly any information. We just drops of information that we can manage to get. We can talk about verified information, paranoid state. Their leader, I think, well, if you understand what I'm trying to say, he seems a very pleasant person. He comes out and talks about having wonderful nuclear armaments that could blow us all up, but they have cybernetic force or power, which not even Obama has. So, well, to what degree? I don't know whether this is just as a kind of dissuasive tactic or to gain importance on an international scenario. But, they don't even play on the international scene. They stay within their geographical region. It's strange. So I could give my opinion. Well, I would say that country makes me feel uncertain, and uncertainty is something that I think is a bad sign. I don't feel comfortable with that, because if you're uncertain, it means you don't know how to react, you don't know how they're going to act, or you're not sure how they may respond or how we could respond. So that's an important issue. We have to focus on Korea. What can we do with North Korea? That's another interesting question. They don't have external diplomats. We can't visit the state, we can't talk to them, and there's no interest on their part of collaborating with them. So it's a strange element which floats there, in the international scene. It's, well, he talks a lot about their power and their potential, but then we can't see anything. But that doesn't mean we don't need to focus on it, because, well, when we're not expecting it, we could have a problem, have an issue there, and they could lash out. But here we have experts in international affairs who may be able to tell us more. It's complex. For me, it's a kind of fuzzy area. But danger, well, it could be considered dangerous just because we don't know what they can do and what they are going to do. Second question, what was it, the second question? Okay, the people that collaborate with the security forces, yeah, privacy is ensured. There's no manual which lays out the guarantees. You can't, for example, if you collaborate, and if we say, I'm going to give you a certain percentage of information, we're going to give you a certain equivalent level of privacy or of protection. It would depend on the case, obviously. The information that an individual person may have could be very interesting, could be very powerful. And I would imagine, well, what you have to do is turn and go to the authorities and give them the information that you have. There are a lot of researchers now without belonging to the police force or the guard, no, the civil guard, they are carrying out social research, and what they do is they contact cyber terrorists and these people that are looking to capture young girls and boys. That information that they can have outside the law, not because they're doing strange things, but because they don't form part of the police forces or the security forces, that can be of great interest. And it's tough, but nobody's asked them to do that. So, and they're not going to offer you anything more than a certain degree of guarantee of privacy. This is, again, a rather obscure and confused area because it's a very sensitive area. And the third question? What was it? They have their mentality is that they're everybody. Their target is everybody. Well, I'm going to say something that may shock you. It's very important to show this to people and make people understand this. So when before I said, I talked about the idea. Well, like I said, at a conference, somebody once said that some people that get into terrorism are not, illuminated people who've decided to blow themselves up or I want to kill 23, 50, 60, 70 people. Unfortunately, well, there are many psychology and psychiatry studies to analyze who could be a potential terrorist or not. But the greatest or the largest number of these people are not psychopaths or strange people. These are people who perhaps don't have any expectations in life. They live in complex, very difficult situations, and they live in a country where there's a civil war or ethnic conflict, where the only thing that guarantees your safety is to have a gun or to belong to a group which will offer you a certain degree of stability, but that doesn't justify it or legitimize it in any way. But those people perhaps find themselves in this tricky moment, this point where they decide to go to form part of Daesh. And in Daesh, they provide them with a salary and they give them a role. And psychology and psychiatrists have talked about this idea of the importance of meeting people's needs, and to be recognized by other people is really hugely important, and these terrorist groups offer that to these individuals. They make you feel like a person who has an important role for a cause, and we talk about the jihad. When we talk about the jihad, well, if you really, when I've looked or studied at the issue of the jihad, there are very few references to violence. I think we have to be careful when we use that term. But when people find themselves at the point of radicalization, they're going to become radicalized through the idea of, fighting infidels, the idea that Allah will welcome you, you are going to guarantee yourself, the idea of a death, fighting for a decent cause, a dignified cause. Those are the things that they sell. But if we manage to get rid of those ideas, then we would eliminate the hook. I mean, we can't fish without a hook or without the bait. And so people have heard about recruitment in certain areas, certain places, and places of worship, and they may still continue. But if we really cleaned up the web of those radical messages, then we would have really fulfilled one of our tasks. I'm not going to become radicalized unless I come across messages which do that to me. And there are experts in networks and media. All of these people have a huge role. So, in other words, if I automatically have no access to certain messages via Facebook, via Twitter, then I will not have an incentive to do that. And it's unpleasant to see how social networks that are used by everybody, such as Twitter, Facebook, and such like, how they allow pages to be used by Daesh. For example, Daesh publishes its threats, its murders, its decapitations, but it's a reactive process. We create a page and it gets closed. But if we talked with experts in IT security, this could probably be prevented with sufficient or in advance, so that people, would not have this feeling of, my life is not worth anything, so I'll, give it to a worthy cause. Thank you. Hello, Manuel. Congratulations for that talk. Well, I think it's interesting to have these kinds of presentations to complement the more technical workshops that talk about the vulnerabilities of devices. I would like to imagine a scenario if maybe in 5-10 years, if you imagine, for example, in the United Nations, in the Security Council, perhaps taking decisions, for example, in Spain, where there's a cybersecurity unit in the army, and whether attacks could be carried out on servers. If we have companies that refuse to shut down certain websites, for example, if we're talking about Facebook and such like, in order to attack their servers, if they refuse to close down web pages that promote or allow pages which promote terrorism. So what you're talking about, to what degree that would be possible? The Security Council of the United Nations could promote measures to encourage the closure of such sites. How would you respond to that? Or, it's a difficult balance between privacy and security and freedom. It's a complex area, and the governments exist because we exist, and the Security Council exists because we have decided to create it. If we choose to close websites, it's absurd. It makes no sense. And that scenario that you've described is true, and unfortunately it could end up happening. But I think it would be very negative to take the decision to close websites. It's kind of too much. It's an exaggerated response, and it wouldn't serve a purpose. It's like saying we don't want to have anybody to be able to write unwanted letters, so we just eliminate the postal service. What we have to do is have really great awareness and clean up the social networks. It's not about closing Hotmail or closing Facebook, but really having filters for them. Anything else we want to talk about? Terrorism or those subjects? Well, yes. If we talk about cybersecurity, we're talking about attack or defense. When we talk about cyber terrorism, because they're not cyber terrorists, they're terrorists that we're talking about. So we're talking about the attacking the IT infrastructure of Daesh. Or what are we talking about exactly? Well, that's a good question. I would talk about two areas of action. First of all, we've been working or trying to carry out geolocation for the places from which the highest number of jihadist messages are sent. So you can analyze blue points, for example, where there are a high number of those kinds of messages. Otherwise, it would be a matter of limiting internet freedom. No, that's not what it is. We're talking about limiting those messages to kind of create a kind of umbrella or barrier so they can't go any further. So we would have protocols that could identify, promote these activities, and we could either eliminate them or make sure that they did not flow into the global ocean of internet. We don't know what technologies they're using in Daesh. And I can tell you that they don't have any better technology. They don't know anything that we don't know. The technology is the same. And often what they achieve is because they're very constant and very persistent. And they manage to hack the FBI or the CIA website. But that doesn't mean that they have a great ability to develop these attacks or worms or whatever. We can't prevent them from buying a computer to receive training. So what we have to do is improve our internet, our critical infrastructure on internet. There are a lot of people who are starting to say that it would be good to use biorecognition, so that all of the international infrastructures devoted to cybersecurity were to use the identification using retina and such like, which is interesting, but I don't think that's a solution. I think what we have to do is guarantee that our systems are cyber resilient. So when I receive a cyber attack, we have to be able to adapt to it as quickly as possible. And that's by investing a lot of money, time and effort into improving our systems. And probably if you improve your system, the ability of others to attack you will be drastically reduced. Okay, well, that's it. If you don't have anything else to say, then we can consider that as concluded. If you have anything you wish to discuss with me, I'd be delighted. So, that's great. Thank you very much.